This is Jennifer. Can I get a roll call of who's on so far, please?
Jennifer, Council President Cecilia Coble here.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to volunteer? Who's on the line
here? Weingart's here.
Jocelyn's here.
Selena is here.
Sam is here.
David George is here.
Pete's here.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully Brad can catch up. And if he's having any technical issues, there he is. I knew that would happen. Hold on one second. All right. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, Council President Coble and entire council for jumping on the call here tonight. With you tonight, along with myself, you have Megan Baumgartner, Tony Bagato, and the entire planning team to talk to you about the comp plan. But before they kick it off and really start talking about how we're going to roll this out and what we need to discuss and get some ideas and thoughts from all of you, I wanted to share a couple thoughts and kind of looking forward into 2021, I should say. 2020 was a heck of a year. We don't need to belabor that. It was an unprecedented year in my 15 years of working in city government. I've never experienced anything quite like it. I appreciate the patience that all of you have had as 2020, with the necessity of just the public health and emergencies that we dealt with. It was very much an operational year where we were just heads down trying to get things done tactically. As we look to 2021 and beyond, I think it's imperative that we as a group, and I say that as a group, we start to really think about the broader vision of where we want to go. And I really want to encourage the council members to take as active of a role as they would like to take in the initiatives moving forward. And so one of those key components is the comp plan. At the end of the day, the comp plan, you guys adopt it, you develop it, you adopt it, and then ultimately you make a decision on any given council night whether or not you want to be consistent with that or not. So this really is your playbook for things like land use in the overall transportation plan and vision that we have for our community. One of the things that you'll see from my team, my administration moving forward into 2021 is we know that there are different council members with different passions. And what we want to do is really try to identify what it is you guys care about, what it is you're interested in. And then if there's opportunities to progress things in our community around those passions, we want to try to figure out how we can help do that and give you guys ownership in those initiatives. And so over the next couple of months, what you're going to find, myself and my team will be rolling out a series of projects that we're basically going to pose to the council and say, okay, here's an idea, council members, you know, take this and run with it. Go talk to the community, go engage the community, find out what you think needs to be done and bring that back as a collective group. Also, to try to improve communications among the council members and my team, Chris and I will be setting up monthly luncheons with groups of you to just sit down and have a conversation about what's going on in the community, just open discussion about what's happening and what's transpiring. So there's going to be a series of things, hopefully optimistically looking to 2021 as a year where we can really get back to the business of moving our community forward in a positive way as a collective group. First and foremost is this concept plan. And David, you were here. A number of our council members were involved and some who were not council members, but might have been engaged. When we did our 2040 plan, the first go round, just a little quick historical perspective, we were a community that never had really a comprehensive plan prior to that. We had a series of individual plans, whether that was a park plan or a transportation plan, but we never really had a comprehensive plan that pulled everything together. We brought together 70, 80 Fishers residents. We had a number of committees that some of you participated on. And we set up about a path for our community and really tried to execute on a number of those initiatives. Tonight, what I think Tony and his team are going to try to convey to you is, first of all, provide you some context as to where we are in the progression of that plan. What have we accomplished? What have we not accomplished? What has changed in that time frame? So that's going to be the report out. What we need from all of you is feedback on what are your priorities, what are your questions, what are your thoughts about where we need to go as a community around some kind of key fundamental topics like transportation or land use or things of that nature. And that's going to guide our direction to the committees as we break out from this and we go into our committees to have these conversations. The questions that you want answered are what's going to help us kind of guide the committee as we work through that. And then finally, and I'll turn this over to Tony, we're looking for each one of you, if you choose to, if you want to, what committees are of interest to you? What do you want to take an active participation in and a role in? Because we had lots of council involvement last time. It's important to get your guys' perspective at that committee level. So towards the end of this conversation tonight, we'll be soliciting kind of where do you want to go? What do you want to be a part of as we talk about kind of the 4 pillars of this plan. Finally, and then I'll be quiet and turn it over to Tony and his team. I'm going to be along for the ride here for the first hour, but then I do apologize. I have to jump over to the Gray Eagle meeting to present on that with the neighborhood. But I'm sure with Megan and Tony, will be in more than capable hands to kind of finish it out for the night. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tony to get us started.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the intro, Scott. So I'll just switch over to the PowerPoint and cover our topics. And I will highlight that, we're recording this on Teams for transparency, as well as we are live streaming from the council chambers. So if anyone's watching online, they can view what we're doing. So I want to make sure everyone's seeing the slide right now for Fishers 2040.
Yeah, I think we're good, Tony.
Okay. So tonight we will basically cover the agenda real quickly. Scott gave a great intro. Welcome. We'll do an overview of the 2040 and the update process, a focus for the update, the subcommittee assignments, and then the next steps. So we covered this back in this summer, and I don't want to go too much into it, but the Fishers 2040, as Scott laid out, this is our playbook for the city, how we develop, how we look at roads, how we look at infrastructure, how we spend our dollars for parks and everything else. So it's a long-term policy guide. It identifies policies and projects and programs. It's implemented over time. So we have, a 20-year plan, and we're 5 years in. And it's the foundation for our city regulations. It applies to our zoning ordinance and the UDO that was created in 2018. The vision statement, City of Fishers is to be a smart, vibrant entrepreneur city. And I think, the development we've done, we've definitely taken that to heart in our department and through the other areas of the city, and making sure we're trying to achieve this vision. The 4 main chapters of the 2040 plan focuses on future land use, housing and neighborhoods. Parks and open space is what it's labeled today. We are now going to condense it to just parks, move open space under land use because it does really fall more into that category, and then transportation. And these will also be the 4 subcommittees we're going to ask the council to select and be part of the discussion with our steering committee.
Hey, Tony, this is Pete. I'm not seeing anything on the screen. So just FYI.
Okay. Is anyone else having trouble seeing?
I can see.
I can see.
Me too.
I can see it.
Pete,
I as well, Tony.
I don't know if Pete, you want to try to call back in, or I don't know if there's a different setup you have.
I can try.
Okay. And then other things that are covered, and one we want to add in this update. So throughout the plan, there's talks of accountability. There's accessibility, focusing around ADA and other accessibility elements. Public art, then public health, and that's the new one we want to add with the incorporation of the health department and how that can play into these different categories. And then lastly, sustainability. The purpose of the update is to analyze the current trends, which we'll highlight some of those tonight, consider some refinements to the goals or action items, identify the land use for the study areas, and then consider future priorities with this update. So to date, we've actually had, the comp plan had 232 action items. We have 22% done, which is 52 complete, 118 ongoing, and 62 not started. I will say from my perspective in analyzing the data, we actually have more complete than the percentage shows. The 118 ongoing is kind of misleading because a lot of those goals are things that we do annually every year. And so there's been some discussion internally that maybe we move those out into like a maintenance chapter instead, so that by the end of the 20-year period, we want to see, what percentage of the goals we actually did hit. And so that's something we'll be discussing as part of the internal cleanup. Again, other highlights I wanted to point out from 2016, since 2016, that was not actually part of the comp plan, but are important to discuss in the update. The Nickel Plate Trail designation, Geist Waterfront Park and Agri Park, establishment of the health department, as I mentioned. We have performed a greenhouse gas analysis and inventory. The police station, the fire station is just a highlight of the downtown. And then we did create an arts and culture commission and established a new master plan. So I'll be talking more about future land use tonight. And I want to highlight real quickly, we had 24 items in that chapter. The big updates I would say we did complete was the UDO rewrite. It was completely rewritten to match the comp plan. We did incorporate some sunsets for the PUDs, and we addressed open space standards. I think those are the biggest highlights. The biggest thing that we have left to do that's not started would be aligning the zoning map more with the comp plan, especially around some of the mixed use categories, and then addressing these land use study areas. So this was the future plan that was adopted. The big ones, as I stated, is the study areas. That's all these cross-hatched areas, this large ones on State Road 37 and 126. But in the plan, there was 11 areas highlighted for study in the comp plan. We want to focus on 9, and I'll point out the 2 we're not going to focus on, but here's the 9 that we're going to focus on as part of this update. We have Allisonville Road and 96th Street, the airport property, Lantern Road corridor, State Road 37, 126 as you go east of Cumberland, Hoosier Farms area, but north 116th and Hoosier, the northeast corner of 131st and Brook School, the 136th corridor, and then the southeastern and Atlantic corridor corner here on the far east side of town. The ones that we removed was one of the areas is around Topgolf and the Fishers District. This area is already developing more in line today with what we envisioned, or even like a more beyond that as an entertainment district. So we would recommend that not needing to pursue this further, or at least maybe clarify. And then the last section, there's an area highlighted here at the far west, about 116 and White River. And those are residential properties today and should be something we should consider, I think, in the future, not necessarily part of this update, and how we want to handle the connection along White River there. So the key questions for you, and that we're going to open this up for discussion, and it might be best to maybe raise hands to kind of figure out who wants to speak when, but these are open questions for the discussion around land use. And the first one is, what do we want to achieve with future land use? And then the second one is, what is our top priority? So with that, I'll open up for discussion. Okay, Jocelyn, you want to go?
Yeah, I guess my first question is if there's been some sort of analysis of what the needs are for land use, and especially since the 2040 plan has been available for so many years, what needs to be adjusted? So I guess I'm looking for findings or analysis of where we have already been.
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the broader discussion. What does the council feel about our current land use? Is there the right mix? Do we need the more mix of commercial, residential? That's kind of what we're looking for direction and discussion about. We haven't done an overall analysis, but we can work on that.
This is Tony, this is Scott, and I don't know how to raise my hand, or I would, so I apologize for interrupting. But I think what's really important for you guys tonight is, if you frame things like Jocelyn just did, if we frame it in the point of a question, that's for the committee to then go answer. So we're not expecting you guys to have answers necessarily tonight, but more like, hey, well, maybe one of the things that would drive this is, do we have the right mix of residential versus commercial based on our financial needs? That's a question that could be posed to this committee to then go pursue. So I think when we talk when we say, well, what is the top priority for land use? It's really, the real question there is, what are the most important questions around our land use that need to be answered by the committee? And one of those, I think, as Jocelyn mentioned, is, where do we stand? And you can look at that through the financial lens. You could look through it in terms of environmental standpoint or green space. You could look at it different ways, but that would be one question is, do we have the right mix to meet our financial obligations? I'll say another thing here. I think we can't emphasize enough how important it is, from my perspective, for the committee to answer the question around what these special study areas are going to be. Because we've had, if you recall, as council, we've had some big question marks there. State Road 37, we had that apartment complex come in that was proposing to go in one of the special study areas. And we did have this discussion at council as well, what do we really want to see on that property? So it would be good, I think, for this committee, of these 9 spaces that Tony talked about, what do we want to see in those areas, and what can council approve in a comprehensive plan that says this is our vision for these areas to send a signal to development? Because right now, I think there are 6 or 7 places in Fishers where we haven't sent a clear signal to the development community or to our residents as to what does the council want to see in those areas. But I think that's a critical component.
Hey, Scott, this is Pete, and Tony, this is Pete. I don't know how to raise my hand either. I guess the question that I would have from the 2040 plan special study areas, have every one of those been moved over to this particular restudy, if you will, or the redo of the comp plan? I want to make sure we're not leaving any special study area uncovered within regards to the land use.
And perhaps to go ahead, Cecilia.
Well, I agree with that. I think really looking at the special study areas, I mean, some of those have been sitting there since we started the comp plan, and I would like to know, how is the current employment trends or corporate mindset after COVID? How is that going to affect the land use that we had set aside for, corporate headquarters or an employment, nodes and that kind of thing. The other thing I'm interested in learning more is what's unincorporated, what part of the land could potentially come into the city limits, right? So I'm wondering what the ratio is of what percentage of land within the Fisher city limits is still unincorporated. I'd like to know that.
Yeah, this is John. I think I raised my hand as well. I'll go ahead and speak up. I think we need to really take a hard look at kind of the marketplace right now as well. I think, office space right now is going to be not a real hot marketplace. I mean, I'm looking at renewing my lease and cutting back on my space because I've got folks working remotely. Do we need to be thinking about how to attract the remote worker as part of this and have the product to attract the remote workers? But also, what's that demand going to be out there, and how do we fit that in? Which again always boils down to me. It always boils down to money. How are we going to be able to financially sustain this community with that type of stock, and make sure that we're able to fulfill our obligations, service our community, but also not put up a bunch of buildings that are going to stand empty?
Selena, you had your hand up?
Yeah, actually, John took a lot of what I was going to say, so very good, John, thank you. Just to add to that a little bit is, as we look at attracting that remote worker or that company that has a lot of remote workers, what type of, stock do we need? What do we need? Do we need more entertainment? Do we need more apartments? Do we need more housing? What's going to attract us?
It's great. Jocelyn?
I will add, it seems like every time we're talking about land use, on the fringes of that conversation is collaborating with the school district to be sure that we are at least communicating with them. I think that's already happening, but that always seems to be part of that overall conversation. So I'll toss that in.
Yeah, that's a great point. What are the impacts on the schools long term, or do they need more students as they mature and want to grow? And what does Wayne Township mean to them? Those are all really important questions. One thing that Tony brought up, and it's nuanced, but I think it's important to draw out of you guys tonight what your concerns are. And we made a distinction here around green space. It used to be we would have parks and green space together in a category, but in reality, it kind of takes away from the focus of building a park system, because green space is a little bit different. Green space really is about land use, because it's no different than saying, I'm going to put a manufacturing building here, or I'm going to put 3 acres of green space here. Same conversation. So I guess from your guys' perspective, in my 15 years of being here, I've seen an evolution around green space. In the early days, it was we put it into the UDO, and people would say, well, we're going to meet our standards for green space. And so we would put these little patches of land in our neighborhoods, and that would count towards the collective green space, if you will. But I think we learned in the 2040 plan last time that didn't always add up to really meaningful space for our residents. It just kind of met the requirement. It was the bare minimum of a legislative requirement. So as we talk about green space and we challenge this committee to really delve into it, what are the questions or concerns or observations that you guys have around the element of green space in our community that we could challenge them with? Jocelyn?
I was a member of the Parks and Green Space Subcommittee. And one of the things we talked about neighborhood green space versus public parks. And we found or concluded that residents don't make that big of a distinction. A park is a park. And I guess I tossed that in because I thought that was really an important note to say, okay, well, so where are park deserts, I guess? Where are residents being underserved with green space or parks? They don't differentiate one from the other.
Yeah, and I could mention, I mean, the new UDO does emphasize trying to create active open space. So when you see like the Fishers District, their open space is met through the common green that they provided there. And so those things that we think are successful versus the previous kind of passive open space, I think those are things that's important to talk about.
Cecilia, you have a question?
Well, I can't remember if we had an analysis of where the open space was in the city limits. Do we have that from last time?
Yeah, that will be talked with the parks. We have that information.
Right. The other thing, Scott, and it's kind of not related to open space, but I think another area of special study should be the Allisonville corridor, like 160th Street going south to 96th Street. That whole area, to me, it needs to be redeveloped or re-looked at. I don't know what like Celine and David think, but I think that needs to be another area to look at.
I think this is an important point on the land use that I think I wanted to dovetail into what Pete had mentioned, making sure that we were covering those things that we had discussed at the last comp plan. But I think there is an important question to be asked. Are there new areas of special study that we should be taking a look at? Things have changed in 5 years. So, the ones that we have on that list that Tony shared with you are ones that were remaining from previously. That doesn't mean that the council, as well as the committee, is focusing on land use couldn't say, you know what, there's certain areas in our community that we think we need to take an even harder look at. To your point, Cecilia, from 96th Street to 116th Street on Allisonville Road could be an important one. Another, just kind of trying to ideate here, 96th Street would be another one from I-69 to Mollenkamp Road, which could be another area for that. So I think, to your point, we should challenge the committee to say, not only are we taking care of what's already been on the table, what are there new areas for special study? David, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just had some general comments along these, and one of them is now that we have the trail in, and Cecilia, you might have said this, there was a little bit of feedback, so I apologize if it's an extra. But now we have the trail, and then there are some other areas, like for instance, around 106th Street in the neighborhood that I live in, there's a park that is a park of the community, but it could be a discussion maybe with the community to say, would that want to merge a little bit with the trail? So you'd almost have a little bit of a trailhead, not for parking or anything, but just kind of a little beachhead on the trail. And there's probably other areas all up and down the nickel plate, the future nickel plate trail, that you might have some opportunities for that. And then the other one is just in general, I always love how Holland Park is one big park, as opposed to if Sunblest was made up of 15 little Holland parks. So whenever we have a bigger development as they come in, I think it's always neat to have that, because that's kind of a rallying point, not just for Sunblest, but the general community. So that's always nice. One thing I try to think of too is long term. Jocelyn brought up a great point of like park deserts. I never thought of it that way. But the way I think of that is we always build homes. They're brand new homes. Everybody moves in and it's great. But what happens when that home, like the one that I live in right now, it's 30 years old, and we want to make sure that it has the same demand as a brand new home. And I moved in, I know that it's 30 years old. I got to redo the kitchens and bathrooms, which I did, but I've got mature trees. I've got a little bit of a better park setting, and it's always neat. So by having developments further out, if we do have kind of a park desert, maybe it's good to think about that to try to create that amenity so that when that home is 30 years old, people will say, I want to live here because of that. And that might be that park nearby. So that's one thing. And then the last thing is, it's not really parks, but it's connectivity to parks. So along 106th Street, the people that live nearby, they can't reach the Nickel Plate Trail because you've got some connections that are starting to get made. But maybe if we could pull back and kind of see how all of our parks are connecting, and I'm just mentioning one area, but a lot of them. So if you're on a stroller with your kid, you don't want to drive somewhere, but you want to move from your neighborhood to your nearby park, or maybe it's a couple neighborhoods away. Can you safely get there, and where are those gaps? And maybe think about that. So over the next 5 or 6 years, we can start to, and I know you guys do that, but just maybe a map or something. So we as a committee, we can kind of look through that.
Yeah, we have that transportation plan, and that's one of the questions. How do we want to spend our transportation dollars? Do we want to look at alternative transportation like trails or maintenance and those kind of things? We can get.
Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms of the connectivity we continue to talk about, I think there also needs to be some discussion on how we bridge both the east and the west sides of the city, not only from across 69, but potentially across the White River. I mean, I know there's been conversations about it here or there because they're very expensive undertakings, but this is a 2040 plan or 2044 plan or whatever we're going to call it. So I think they need to be brought into that conversation too on land use, how we bridge that back and forth in those collective nodes, which we have, whether it's proper at 96, whether it's proper at 116th, is it proper at Brook School? Is it proper over at Eller Park? Is it proper at 126? Where is the right places to look at those connectivity points?
John?
Certainly something that comes up every once in a while is, the infamous Swiss cheese that we have here in Fishers. How do we start kind of really collaborating and talking with the townships on how we work together? But, even hopefully at some point, maybe having all that come into Fisher, the city of Fishers, come in as part of our city. But at the bare minimum, I think, if we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about land use. I think, somehow we need to have them as part of that conversation to ensure we have that connectivity.
It's a great point about kind of the intergovernmental relationships and also the kind of the intersectionality of all these things coming together is really the point of the comp plan. So where we can take these land use conversations and overlay the transportation desires and see where they come together. So in out of respect for time, I want to make sure, Tony, we can move on to the next category. And this is not an exhaustive list tonight, but it really helps our team start to put together a list of questions that we can ask the committee to really chew into. So Tony, do we want to move on to the next category here?
Yeah, so housing and neighborhoods is next, and I'll let Jesse will cover this chapter and lead that subcommittee through the process.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. As you can see, there are 47 action items for housing and neighborhoods. Of those, 34% have been completed, so that equates to 16, 19 ongoing, and 12 that have not been started. Just to give you some highlights, one of the things that we did was update the UDO to address connectivity, update the residential architectural and design standards, just to give you a few of the highlights there. And still to do, green building standards or incentives, ways to encourage innovative residential development, and universal design standards or incentives. So that way people don't have to come back in and retrofit if there is someone in their family that is handicapped. Next slide, Tony. As you can see from the population growth, it aligns with the projections. Census Bureau estimates 96,301 for the city of Fishers. Our department estimates 97,900. Just to give you a perspective, the estimate for 2040 is 131,525, and that was a part of the apartment study that Tony provided to you all as at work session a while back. Next slide, Tony. As you can see, our population is getting older. 65 years and over has increased to 8.5%. 45 to 64 years old is 25.9. So just to give you an idea there of how it has increased, and the young millennial 20 to 24 is at 4.9. So it's also increased, showing that we have a vast majority of our population aging in place, as well as millennials that have also moved into the city. Next slide. This slide goes over total households, just to show you, put it into perspective for you. There has been an increase in single persons households and an increase in married couples without children. So single parent or married couples without children. So, they are not in need of a large home. That did stay at 26.8%. So it's kind of plateaued, but single parents has increased due to the school system. Hamilton Southeastern schools are great. So parents that are single are moving into the area so that their children can go there. Family households still holds at 74.6%, but just to give you an idea, of the households, there's 75.1% that are family households, but of the total of the 100%, 24.9 are single person households. That's for both millennials and seniors. So that goes into showing a trend of, what kind of housing type do we need to move towards in the future. Next slide. The key question for this subcommittee will be, what is our desired product outcome for housing and neighborhoods? So taking that information and data and trends, just seeing how our population has changed over time, and to just, looking at aging in place, it's predicted that it'll go from 7.5% of our population that is 65 plus will go up to 17.8 by 2040. So we need to start planning for that. So I would ask you, what is your idea of desired product outcome? Is it, the same single family owner occupied, or should we move towards more middle housing options? And I'll open that for discussion.
Thanks, Jesse. This is Scott. The only thing I would want to add on this category is, again, I sound like the old guy here, but I'm besides David, I think I got the most years in the city at this point. But there was a time frame, if you go back even to Walt Kelly, one of the things that they really prided themselves on was creating a housing stock where someone who was starting out in their life, a starter home, if you will, in a new job and a new career, maybe single or just have gotten married. They had the ability, and there was an attainability to a home to enter into our community. And then what many of the policymakers over the years had prided themselves on in the council was that Fishers tried to create a variety of housing all the way through the ranks, whether you wanted a starter home at $95,000 back in the day, all the way up to a multi-million-dollar home in a Hamilton proper or a Geist reservoir, that our community had a diversity and that you could grow your family and you could grow your net worth, if you will, or your career, and you could do that all within one community. And I think in a lot of ways, we executed on that for a number of years. I think with property tax reform, with the increasing demand for people to live in Hamilton County, with the architectural standards and zoning that we put in place, the policies around that have changed. And one of the things that I'm not putting a value judgment on that as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's something that you as a council really need to think about when we talk about what is our desired product outcome for housing in neighborhoods. It comes down to kind of this fundamental question. I mean, you can be in a community that values and wants a particular type of home, a particular standard, if you will, or another. And so I really do think this is a very, very important question for the limited land we have remaining in our community and then the infill projects that we have. And I think, too, one thing to put things in perspective, this is not Fishers of 2000 or 1990, where you're looking at 40% of your land left to develop into homes. I mean, we really are reaching kind of the end game here in terms of our ability to develop. I don't know, Tony, if you have any statistics on that, but in terms of land use left to actually build homes, we are getting closer to the end than we were to the beginning.
I would say we're at 6 or less than 6% of vacant land, not including maybe some large redevelopment potential, but yeah, it's not very much.
So I just want to put that in perspective as we talk about, what kind of housing do we want? Just know that the amount of housing left to be decided is a pretty small percentage of the land left. But with that, I would be really curious from your guys' perspective, what questions or thoughts you have on a housing strategy for our community and what you would like to see out of this committee. Jocelyn?
I'm a believer in balanced housing stock to accommodate every life stage. And now what does that look like? And what holes do we need to fill in our community? I'm not sure, but I feel that way because it would be a shame if someone who was a Fishers resident, as they stayed here for many years and moved to the next life stage, let's say a family to an empty nester, felt like there was no opportunity for them and was literally forced to leave our community because there was nothing for them here. And I think we all know, like, community engagement and really engaged, passionate residents are from folks that have been here for a long time, right? They're invested in our community. I hate to lose them. So that's just my perspective on that.
Great. Any other thoughts, comments, questions from folks? David?
Yeah, this might be a little similar to what I was saying on the previous topic, but I feel like they're a little bit connected. And obviously the side of town that I live on is on the western side, west of 69, and I've actually lived here 25 years. So I've kind of seen some changes where 116th and Allisonville did not have the Kroger. It was a field. The Target wasn't there. There was an old boat dealer that was closed where the hotel is at 69 and 116th, and I'm dating myself, yes, but I always bring up the fact that a lot of people, exactly what you said, Mayor, everybody moved here. Everybody was maybe 29 or 31 and they didn't have kids. And then they had a kid and they kind of moved east and And now a lot of those people that were here, they're still here, at least in the neighborhoods that I live in. And I always try to think of what do they want? In other words, if they were to sell or move a lot of people move to Florida or something like that as they start to retire, then who would want to buy the same homes? And I think Jesse was bringing up a great topic too, where he had different age groups. So it's kind of interesting to look at that. But at the same time, I hope people don't want to be in a certain specific age group. I think in the Del Webb community, that's something that they desire and they really look for. But in a lot of other communities, I have great conversations with people that have just moved in, they're in their 20s, and people that have lived here 20 years beyond the time that I have, that are in their 50s and 60s, and it's a great fabric. But the thing that I think makes it cohesive is having the little things nearby. Like for me, I can walk to the farmer's market. If you're up in the Saxony area, you can walk to that. They've got a farmer's market there. If you're a little bit more northwest by Salina, you've got Conner Prairie. For southeast, you've got some Geist areas like around Pete. But I think those neat things around every community, I think, are as important as the exact square footage and size and price of a home. I don't know if that's along the topic, but it's something that's always near and dear to my mind. I just want to make sure that no matter what age group of a home, not the people, but the home, it's always got that desirability.
So, David, I think you brought up a really insightful point in that in the past, Fishers has always been focused on what are we going to build next, because we've been a growing community. This idea of what second or third generation homeowners can expect in a home that's already here is a really critical part of this comp plan that we've never really focused on, because we've always been, well, we're going to just build more stuff. But to the question of, well, how do we maintain what we have, or how do we create a really attractive housing stock with the housing stock that we already have, is a really great question. John, you had your hand up next. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, just thinking out loud. I mean, if I look at the millennial age group and folks 55 and over, typically those folks actually kind of want, if you got folks that the kids are out of the house, it's just a couple, or even young folks that are it's the husband, wife, or the couple, and that product's very similar. I mean, so it's almost like a barbell, if you will, where you've got what's going to bring them in, then they come in, and then they get married, then they want a bigger home to raise their family, then they're done with that home, then they want to go back to what they had before. And how do you but I think those two pieces to me tend to be very similar on each end of the spectrum of your housing life.
I agree. And I think we're seeing that play out more and more. And Jesse's numbers are really, if you think about them, kind of startling, that the age group that's going to, as we see older people, I think it was going to increase by 10% in the next few years. So that's pretty incredible. When you see demographic shifts of 10% of the population shifting into a new age category, that's pretty incredible. Selena, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to build on what David and John have stated here, and that is, I think we need to look at the sustainability of neighborhoods. You look at neighborhoods, in my area, we have Sunblessed. There's a lot of rental properties in there. How do we encourage some of these renters or landlords to help maintain the vitality of that neighborhood? And, because some areas are getting to the point that there's so many rentals, one of the areas is Madden Drive, that there's a lot of rentals there. The yards aren't kept as well. How do we help them to maintain the vitality of that neighborhood as we move forward?
Pete, you had a question?
Well, not so much a question, Scott, but as we look at this housing stock and what's left to build and the population numbers which Jesse had put up there, I mean, I think we also need to consider the further we spread out, we have additional needs that need to be met from a city perspective, right? So, and what those needs are: public works, sanitary, water, police, fire, all the things that we provide as public service to those households. So as they continue to grow, we also need to consider those things, right? When we're looking at that, because we still have to maintain the financial viability of our city and making sure that the product that we're building is still of quality and serves a need for the community, but then also can sustain the additional services which are going to be put upon it. You know, we see that now with a number of things, most likely or most often in the road problems, right, that we have with some of these communities which were built a long time ago before they were built to our standards and things of that nature. So again, all these things come into perspective for this particular committee to take in mind as we look at it. Need to look at a very large kind of picture of this, because there's a lot of factors that go into the types of homes that you build, the density that you build, you know, the green space, the connectivity, the type of house, the people that will be in there, you know, the kind of cross pollination of each one as they continue to age in place. Again, it's a very dynamic committee. It's going to have a lot to consider for sure.
I think, Pete, you brought up an interesting word that we didn't talk about in land use, but I think it crosses over both land use and housing, and that is density. Because that's a key driver of so much of this. So as land becomes more sparse and therefore more expensive, you're going to see a desire or demand to build more homes on less land. And so thinking through what we want to see from a housing perspective on density, I think will be a critical component of this as well. Are there any other thoughts or questions on the housing and neighborhoods conversation before we move on to the next pillar? Okay, Tony, you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, so the next one will be Parks, and Megan Schaefer will be leading this as well as the subcommittee.
Yes, good evening, Council. Like Tony said, Megan Schaefer, and I'll be leading the subcommittee for this chapter. So just to highlight a few things, we did touch on this in the land use category, so don't want to repeat too much, but we did have some new park system over the past 5 years, the Geist Waterfront Park, the Agri Park, and the Nickel Plate Trail. We've pursued some new partnerships. We've updated the ADA transition plan, and we are exceeding ADA requirements in any of our new parks facilities. So some items that were included in the plan but are still to do would be improved lighting at parks for safety, incorporating Wi-Fi into our park system and fitness equipment, continuing to promote art in the redevelopment areas and within our city parks. And then this was mentioned briefly, but is also an action item currently in the plan, but working with neighborhoods to inventory private open space to consider in that park to population ratio. Jocelyn had mentioned, residents aren't necessarily aware of what green spaces are public versus private. So making sure that we capture those, and then also utilizing environmental best practices in our park system. Tony, if you want to move to the next slide. So back in 2016, there was a land acquisition analysis that was completed to identify the areas of the city that were best suited for parkland. So the darker green areas shown here are the ones that contained those characteristics. So since the adoption of the comp plan, we have, like I said, incorporated 2 new parkland into our parks network. So that would be the Agri Park and then the Geist Waterfront Park, which is currently under design. So that's an additional 103 acres of parkland. And then something else that's not included on here is the Nickel Plate Trail, which would be considered almost a linear park. So that will be a part of our overall parks network. If you want to move on to the next slide, thank you. So the goal in 2016 was to maintain a ratio of 6.75 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents, and to also provide a mix of amenities, which included passive, active, and athletic parks. So that graphic is shown here. It divides the city into quadrants, and it was really to make sure that all corners of the city had access to parkland and also a variety of the amenity types. So to make sure we continue to meet the needs of residents, we may also want to consider other types of park spaces, such as indoor versus outdoor, for all seasons use, making sure they're age friendly, continuing to be ADA accessible, and then also a focus on health, education, and environment. So with that, I did note a few of the items that were mentioned under land use, which were, where are there potentially park deserts, where are residents being underserved, which will update, our analysis to include the new parkland, and then identifying opportunities along the Nickel Plate Trail for additional parks or private parks. But the question that we wanted to pose before you tonight is, What do we want our park system to be? What are our priorities, and what do we currently not have that you guys would like to see?
Thanks, Megan. And I think this one's a little wishy-washy, I would say, from my perspective, in the sense that this is a big vision conversation. I can go back again from some historical perspective. When I first came to the town, there was almost a singular obsession for our park system around athletics. And so for a number of years, the only thing that we really built in regards to our park system was sports. And you got almost singular purpose parks. So, Mudsock Park is football fields, Cumberland Park, soccer fields, Billericay, baseball fields. And that was really the defining moment. And I think that marries alongside the fact that we were building a lot of single family residential homes, and you had a lot of young families there, and there was this insatiable appetite for outdoor athletics and sports. And then over a period of time, I think we kind of caught up to demand to some degree for those fields. And so we transitioned into more of these passive parks or unique settings. So Flat Fork Creek Park was intentionally not built as an athletic park because we wanted to create something different for our residents. Agra Park, something different and creative. Geist Waterfront Park, something different and creative. I think the question as we ask this, what do we want our park system to be? It really is this conversation. If you were talking to someone that didn't live in Fishers, how would you describe the park system? And what do you want it to be? What do you think it should be? What do we have a unique opportunity to create here in the city of Fishers? So, that's really the question. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm going to jump off here in a couple minutes to get on to the Gray Eagle meeting. But I think that is the question of the night for the park system is, what do we want to create? What do we want to be proud of when it comes to our park system, 20 years from now? David?
Yeah, overall, I think we've got a great park system. The only thing, and it's something I deal with every day when people say, well, we don't have a park here and here. I'm like, actually, we do. And then you guide them to the website, you guide people to other things. So I don't know if there's a way. And then once they see that, like for instance, you've got Cheney Creek, which is literally a couple minutes from the downtown. And if I take a picture and show it to people and they say, well, that's Brown County. Nope. That's 5 minutes from the downtown and it's near I-69. They don't realize that connectivity. And then you've got that in Ritchie Woods and Heritage Park in that east zone of town. It's kind of a neat place. It's hard for people to see. So I don't know if maybe we look at signage and things like that or other things. I know you guys do a great job of getting the information out, and maybe people just don't see it sometimes, but that's one thing is just the notoriety, because I think we've got a great, and Scott, you're exactly right. It started off as all younger kids. You got to have things for the younger kids. But then flipping to my next topic is, I think in this day and age, and especially we've noticed it this last year, we just need to unplug. And the more you have opportunities to unplug, the better. So the more we have greenways, like I walked with a couple of neighbors the other day with, I think it's going to be called the Mud Creek Greenway, which is over near 96th Street all the way up to the park on Cumberland Road. It was really a neat kind of experience. You can just downshift a little bit and get away into nature, and I think that's good. And then if we have more opportunities for that, that are maybe paved in some areas that are safe for people, with strollers and things, that's kind of neat. So I think more ways to unplug, less. I'm not as worried about the ball fields and things, but just have paths, and it could be linear parks. And I think some of those, like the Mud Creek Greenway, if I'm saying it right, are kind of neat too, because the Nickel Plate Trail will have a lot of activity and energy. And then other people at other days, you might just want to get into nature a little bit. And that small, short walk from the Cumberland and 106th Street Park down through that creek and then back, that's a neat way to unplug. And I think that's healthy for the population to have. That's it.
I couldn't agree more about people needing or having a desire to unplug and creating unique spaces where they can do that. I think that's a great point. John, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I live down by Cumberland Park, which is predominantly used for soccer fields. And I think the main thing I'd like to see there is when it's not being used as soccer fields, having that walkability, having the ability to bring your dog over there and walk around and play. During soccer season, quite frankly, if you're not playing soccer, you don't have any place to park, you don't have any place to walk. So it's a little frustrating. I wouldn't have said that 15 years ago when my son was playing travel soccer, but I can say it now as someone now who, doesn't have that. So, but really other than that, just having that walkability connectivity, that's the one thing I really enjoy.
Jocelyn?
I just wanted to add, I feel like our park system is amazing. And I'm wondering if this pillar, the opportunity to discuss and provide vision, is also in the area of programming and the arts, and not just public art, but performance art and cultural efforts perhaps fit underneath this pillar as well, because I think that is something that we're not up to our full potential on. And I think it slides underneath here.
Yeah, and I think that leads to a question whether or not, do we want to focus more indoor space? Maybe look at a gap analysis of what we may need for the community.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and I think this is where the comp plan diverges a little bit from your traditional kind of planning and zoning. This is our park system master plan. And so I think it is an appropriate conversation to have about not only the physical infrastructure, but the programming side of it. So, you can't have one without the other. If one should drive the other. So I do think that's a good point, Jocelyn. And I don't think we should shy away from having those discussions at the committee level, because if all we were going to talk about is where we're going to put the parks, then we can just do that in land use and not have a separate conversation. So I think that's a good point. Pete, I see you're up, and I'll talk to you guys all later. I'm going to jump into this Gray Eagle meeting. So thanks for all your thoughtful comments tonight.
All right, thanks, Scott. My comments probably relate a little bit more to a conversation that's been had at least every year that I've been at council, which is about indoor space. We kind of toyed around with it with using some external private things going on up in the Saxon area. I know we put it out on a number of questionnaires to the general public. Is that something they wanted? Is that something they'd be willing to pay for, et cetera? And I think that absolutely needs to be brought in this conversation to have some sort of indoor parks department that you could do a variety of things from, walking inside when it's winter months like it is now and everybody's cooped up, to additional programming space, to even indoor sports space at some point in time. Is that a conversation that the city needs to be having now as it relates to its overall park master plan? That's it.
And David?
Yeah, real quick, just following.
You muted yourself.
Sorry about that. One thing that Jocelyn brought up made me think of the good point with just art in general. And then you can just include that in your discussion with the committee. And that's just little things like when we painted the traffic signal, boxes and things like that.
Yeah.
I see that in different areas, and those are kind of inexpensive ways to create a little bit of activity, I think, in areas. And you can do similar things, I think, through parks. I know that Heritage Park has some other signage as you walk through. You can kind of get to know different topics that they have. So maybe talk through that, where it's more less about what the uses are and just how you can activate some spaces with a little bit of art. That's I'm not saying do what Carmel does in their roundabouts every time, but just something to kind of interact and let the public interact. Or if you have a family, then it kind of gives you something to do. And like I said, I always think about that when I go by the traffic signal boxes. I think that was a great amenity that I like. Thanks.
Thank you. Pete?
Yeah, so chiming on to where David's at, it's interesting, David, you brought up that point, because on the PUD committees that we've been having with a lot of people coming forward with these new, what I would call business opportunities, we always end up with and Megan was involved in this conversation too in the last couple of PUD committees we had. We had a big kind of large side of a building that was road facing at some point, depending upon which direction you were traveling. But we talked about that, integrating that with art, right? Just a project last night. There was a big, large wall that had a couple of egress points, but that could absolutely be integrated with some art along 37 there. There was another one that we had the previous month that you could activate a whole side of a building for some artwork as you're traveling westbound on 116th from Cumberland Road. Just as a pain, ephes, two-tone, with a couple egresses there. Now you get some sort of mural. So we've been, actively asking that particular community through those PUD committees to work with the Arts Council and try to get something to engage that. I'm all for that. I think that's a great thing. And while I don't like every single piece of artwork that Mr. Brainerd has in his roundabouts, there are a number of them which I really do like. I'll be honest with you. I know they're not cheap, but we can also talk about that. I think all that kind of comes into play for the vibrancy of the city we're talking about.
Good point. Yeah. Cecilia?
Tony, I remember when we started the comp plan, we had done an assessment with the community on parks and recreation and that kind of thing. I'm wondering, was that something that we could do to kind of assess the community again to see like what they want to see in parks? Because we got a lot of great information from that. And with time and now with COVID, I'm sure a lot of people are outdoors more. I'd like to get a more of a sense of maybe people have been visiting the parks more now through this year, and maybe they've got a lot of good suggestions as well to like enhance our park stock and our park experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are definitely questions we could pose to the subcommittee, and some of these, if we can't even address this year, I think they become action items as new goals as part of this update. So we can definitely look at that. Okay, if there's nothing else on parks, we'll move on to our last subcommittee that Ross Hillary will highlight, and that will be transportation.
Good evening, councilors. Again, for the record, my name is Ross Hillary, and as Tony said, I will be taking the transportation chapter through this process. As you can see, the transportation section has a total of 94 action items, so it's pretty large. With 17 of those complete, 53 of those are ongoing, and 24 have not been started, with an 18% completion rate. I will note, though, that several of those goals, action items, are ongoing and annual updating programs and plans, which is why a bulk of those you'll see in the ongoing section. The transportation section is divided into two sections, bicycle and pedestrian, and roads and infrastructure. So under the bikes and pedestrian, I'll highlight the progress of filling gaps in our trail network. Bicycle parking standards were added to our UDO, pursuing experiential trails that connect to our neighboring communities, such as Carmel or Noblesville. And our newest push, this you'll see with that nickel plate trail. And areas that still have work to do include exploring additional funding, as always, and identifying and prioritizing missing trail connections, which I'll touch again on a little bit. None of the roads and infrastructure section, the progress has been made, includes improving and standardizing street design standards to meet NDOT, expanding signal modernization, data-driven safety and congestion issues, and completing annual 5-year resurfacing programs and a capital improvement plan. Areas that you'll see work that we still need to do includes reviewing design features in high pedestrian areas such as the nickel plate district. That includes the possibility of raised crosswalks, curb extensions, and other design features, and to continue to identify active transportation and alternative mobility funding opportunities. On the next slide, you'll see a map of our thoroughfare plan. That plan shows the long-range transportation goals for the vehicular network. This includes existing roundabouts, future intersection realignments, and also shows the road classifications that includes primary, secondary, and arterial roads. Staff uses this, it seems nearly daily when we're making our decisions. This plan is updated as needed, but I'll note, as the mayor said earlier, sections such as the 37 corridor reconstruction project shows where transportation and land use decisions overlap. On the next slide, you'll see is our bike and pedestrian plan, which, like the thoroughfare plan, is a comprehensive plan that city staff follows very closely on road improvement and development projects that places both the cyclists and pedestrians on the forefront. Recent successes that council can experience firsthand is the Allisonville corridor, opening up an additional safe north to south pedestrian and cyclist route that was part of the Allisonville road improvements. This map also shows greenways that can have a huge impact on how we see our community park system in the next 20 years. Several things that I know Megan's team is going to try to tackle. And last, I'd like to share with you a project that came out of 2020. Over virtual meetings, the PR, parks, planning, and engineering departments worked together to update our Fishers public trail route. This showcases a dozen plus trails and trailheads throughout our community where residents and visitors alike can explore Fishers. This map can be accessed online or on your phone and includes the location of different trailheads and details for each trail. This has been shared both through our engineering, parks, and PR departments. We've seen a lot of great traffic and use definitely over this past year. And as the engineering and DPW departments continue to improve our roadways, we only see this map growing with more designated trails. And as I said earlier, this map also helped jumpstart several departments in starting to highlight and prioritize missing trail connections. So with that, I think the key question to address tonight from transportation and for the subcommittee is, what is our 5-year priority for transportation? Again, that's pretty broad like the other ones, but how do we want to spend our limited transportation funds as we look and grow and age from maintenance versus growth, and then alternative transportation options, as well as completing our trail network?
Yeah, and I'll highlight that. I did cover some of the things I brought up earlier. So as David mentioned, under land use, trail connectivity priorities. And then as Pete mentioned, how do we bridge the back and forth connection between East and West Fishers and possibly over White River? So I have those down already. I think as Ross highlighted, we were thinking like, if you had $5 to spend, how would you spend each dollar? Do you want to put $1 towards trail connectivity? Would you want $1 towards, alternative transportation? How much towards road maintenance and any other kind of priorities you see around that in the next 5 years? Thank you, Ross.
One of the other things that we all talked a lot about when we were putting this presentation together is concerns or areas that you hear a lot about from your constituents that we might want to have this committee focus on. So to Tony and Ross's point, is it gaps in the trails? Is it congestion mitigation? Is it constructing new roads or improving the existing roads out on the east side of Fishers? We talked a lot about whether the focus is on the public versus private roads. So those were some of the key things that we had all thought about. David?
Yeah, I just had 3 things as I was listening to Megan and Ross go through things. No particular order or any, not hierarchy or anything. But I know that we talked about it 4 or 5 years ago when we did this. But when you look at 116th Street and you look at Allisonville Road, or many times where you have a road and then you have a sidewalk, but the sidewalk's immediately off the curb, you just don't feel safe. And even if you had 2 feet of grass, it just makes you feel like you're a little bit disconnected. So anytime that we can get that, I know it's tough, whenever you do a new road, you've got a certain width. But as you think through that, and it flows through into how you guys have the some of the zoning categories, if we can have that at any time included, I think that's a good thing. And then also maintenance versus the growth of roads. I've always kind of kept that close to my mind, just my nerd level, since I'm an engineer, it's my day job, but just the maintenance of the roads. I think it's important to have that budget, and we have increased that over the last number of years, but I always think of that less about improving the road and more about keeping older subdivisions headed in the right direction. Not that they're headed in the wrong direction, but it's just, I always think of a couple of realtors that I'd talked to in the past, subdivision, I think it was Lake Stonebridge. They were driving through with somebody who did not know Fishers at all. They drove through and they said, boy, these homes are nice. They're about 4 or 5 years old, aren't they? And they said, nope, they're 20 to 25 years. And you wouldn't even think of that. But when they drove through and the new black pavement was there from curb to curb, it just made that whole subdivision seem, and it doesn't matter what price range you're in, it's exactly the same concept. If we can continue to do that, and the reason I bring it up now is because most of our roads are hitting that 20-year mark. So we're going to have to do maintenance as much as possible over the next, say, 5 to 10 years to get through that stretch, and then we'll be okay. But as we do that, it's going to keep all of our subdivisions on all parts of the community. Because when you think about it, Del Webb is probably starting to hit the point where some of those roads will need to be done. So it's really all over, and it keeps all of our subdivisions headed in another trajectory. So it has less to do about transportation, even though it is transportation, but it's how things are headed in the right direction. And then the last thing, I mentioned it before, but it's just something that, since it's right outside my door, whenever I walk my dog, I always get people, how can we get, I'm in a neighborhood, I'm touching the nickel plate trail and I can't get to it. So like along 106th Street, it's just, and I know there's a couple of houses, I know it's tough, but if we can take a look at all of those, and it's not just, I'm just mentioning 106 because I know Selena's got that further up. Just make sure that we have that. It just help us as we get questions. I can say, here's a plan. It's not going to happen. It'll happen in 2 years. If you can give people ideas and what's going to happen and when, as funding is there, that helps us too. So maybe through that process, we can walk through, now that the nickel plate trails are reality, people are using it, how we're going to get those trail connections, just those small connections on side streets. That would help. Thanks.
Okay.
I think and before Pete kicks in, I think, David, you bring a good point, and thinking about some of the ways that our public works team has looked to maintain some of that infrastructure instead of requiring a complete resurface of a road. I'm sure we all remember over the summer the concrete roads and the patching work and milling that was being done there. That really helps us be able to maintain those roads, some of the sidewalk repairs that are being done. So I think you bring up a really good point, David, about how that infrastructure and transportation impacts the vibrancy of our neighborhoods and our community overall. Pete?
Yeah, so to tie in, I probably get more conversation down in the Geist area as it relates to private residential roads. And I've pushed them off as much as I possibly can. And Jason Taylor and his group have been great. And I know we're attacking the commercial private roads because obviously there is a big reason to look at those first. But we need to develop that plan, how we're going to deal with those, when they get dealt with, what's the policy and procedure to get them dealt with. Because I understand all the pitfalls into just grabbing them and throwing them into our inventory because we don't know where we're going to get. But that absolutely needs to be addressed in this particular committee. Secondarily, David actually brought up a point, which I also get a lot of calls here in Geist due to the trail that goes right along Fall Creek Road there. And while, accident, your reports would not suggest that there's any issue whatsoever with the trail abutting right up next to the road, I get more calls saying that it's unsafe and it's just a perception rather than reality. So I guess I would probably like to put it to our Public Works Department. Is there some sort of good-looking barrier that is effective, not overly expensive, and could be easily retrofitted in there? And it may be only for certain sections of those trails, because I think the perception would be a lot better, and the people feeling not safer, the moms with strollers, et cetera, the elderly kind of up there walking their dog, or anybody kind of doing that. So those are two areas that I think need to be done. I think Dave encapsulated the right call on continuing to maintain these streets. The only thing I'll add to maintaining the streets is that we continue to allow additional curb cuts for ingress, egress to commercial development. And we continue to take out some of the beautification efforts we've done along our main thoroughfares. We need to make sure that when we're taking sections out, that we're reinvesting the beautification efforts in every possible main arterial that we can, right? That's one of the reasons why we did the 96th Street corridor and trying to add some vibrancy down there. That adds immensely to the way people think and deal with the community, right? So I think we need to continue to look at that and make sure we have that as a topic as well.
Yeah, those are great points. Selena, I think you had your hand up at one point too. Did you lower yours or? Selena, I see it raised again.
I did. I'm sorry. I did have it raised, but I think that Pete went ahead and made most of the points that I wanted to make. So I don't have any further questions, but just would like to see the private roads, the neighborhood roads, different things like that addressed. That's really already been met. And then I know we have funding to redo 116th and Allisonville. And like David stated, you know, when we redesign that intersection, we really need to look at, you know, the foot traffic and the bike traffic, and making sure that there's a way there for that traffic to interact with that intersection as well.
Jocelyn?
I'll add a comment that I hear frequently, and I'll paraphrase. I think people are very comfortable about knowing how to get where they need to go, but the challenge is the way they want to get there. Or what I mean is, I want my family to be able to bike to the farmer's market. I want to be able to walk across 69 and go to the district, right? So I'm really fascinated in that. I mean, our community, like almost every community, we're very car dependent. And as we talk about, that's a culture shift, that's infrastructure, but that's also encouraging those alternate modes of transportation and giving the perception of safety. The more people and the more bikes and pedestrians we have out, the more safe they will all be, because motorists will be used to that. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I made sure that we added the prioritizing the safety, and I think that kind of ties into the trails and sidewalks next to roads and how we can help encourage that. David?
Yeah, this is a big picture thing. It's not something you're going to do tomorrow, but Jocelyn made me think of something that I've always wondered about. 69 is a blessing, but it's also like a big river that's hard to cross. And now you have the Fisher's District, or whatever you want to call it, and then you've got the downtown. And I'm kind of dating myself, but when we first started to do the amphitheater, the idea, this was like 2006 to 2008 time range. Some of the downtown things that we thought about was really going over to what at the time was USA Group and things like that, businesses, how to tie that to what would become what's starting to get built, the downtown, and to have a separate, and it's just because back in that time frame, I was traveling the country, so I was seeing all sorts of different suburbs, and many times you would see a separate pedestrian-only bridge, not an addition of 116th Street, a whole separate bridge. This is big picture. This is not like something that it's just maybe doodle on a little bit when you go through the committee, what the ideas are to try to use that blessing of 69 to get people in and out, but then also try to connect. So we even thought about, if you're at the USA Group or whatever on that side, just to be able to do fun stuff like jump in a golf cart and get over to the 4-day rave for lunch and then get back. Things like that to try to make 69 less and less of a hindrance. So big picture, it's not going to happen next week. It's more important to pave our subdivisions than that, but it's something to keep in mind.
Cecilia?
So kind of in line with what David just said, I was thinking, you know, back to the bike share, you know, I thought it would be really cool, again, big picture, if there was a way to do a loop using bikes that you could take, you know, rent a bike, get on your bike and get over across 69 to the west side of the city and then loop back, you know, some kind of dedicated safe bike trail that could loop you, you know, not only just across east-west, but maybe one big loop that would also connect to other, you know, park areas and whatnot. And then also with autonomous vehicles coming, you know, could there be something where there could be some kind of transportation mode that you could access to get east and west, a dedicated lane or something with autonomous vehicle, you know, some kind of autonomous vehicle that could take people from one end to the other, one side to the other, to designated areas of interest in our city, you know. So those were just some things that I thought would be cool long term.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we had, if everybody remembers last year, it feels like a lifetime ago, we had the autonomous vehicle group who was looking to come to Fishers. We think that there's some really cool projects that are out there right now that we're pursuing. And Tony and Megan and the planning team have been working with engineering and even looking back at the tech park by Launch Fishers and the IoT lab to see how we can kind of prepare our infrastructure for future types of mobility and improving mobility for pedestrians and bicyclists. So I think that's a really good point. So we'll put that on here as preparing for and encouraging new technologies in transportation too. Does anybody else have any other comments or things that you'd like to prompt the Transportation Committee to think about? Okay. Tony?
Okay, so then we can move on now to, I think we've covered a lot, but this was kind of like a catch-all. If there was one thing that's still on your mind that we didn't address going over those 4 topics that you want to talk about, that one of the subcommittees could address, this is that opportunity. If not, we can move on to the final slide.
Anybody have anything? Jocelyn?
For me, it's community engagement, and I think that transcends all of this. And we don't need to dive into that right now, but I'll just leave you with those 2 words.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe, Tony, we add that to the beginning where we had like the public health and sustainability, how community engagement can be tied into all 4 of these chapters. So that's a great point.
Okay. And then if you're ready to tonight, we wanted to see if anyone wants to pick a land use or a subcommittee they want to be a part of. If you know and you're eager and know which one you want to be a part of, we're willing to write that down tonight, or we can follow up in an email. And again, as Scott alluded to, if you don't want to participate, that's also an option. But we do have a steering committee that involves some of the citizens. And right now, current President Coble, and we'll also get Vice President Stoller on the steering committee as well. And the plan will be, we have 4 meetings still scheduled right now. They're 2-hour meetings, but the goal would be to have each subcommittee meet for the first hour and a half. So from 4 to 5:30. And then at the end, the steering committees will wrap up and we'll have discussion about what each subcommittee discussed and kind of look at what's the next step for the following meeting. So again, our goal is to get this with the 4 remaining meetings we have left so we can have an April public involvement and then adoption in June.
Tony, it's Pete. Future land use for me.
David?
I'd like to do land use as well.
Jocelyn?
I'm interested in housing and transportation.
And Jocelyn, you saying both of those, there is that option as well. If there's a couple that you're interested in and want to kind of float around, Tony and Ross and Megan and Jesse will all be kind of with those committees that they'll be leading. We'll all be meeting at the same time, but still think that there's an opportunity for you to be able to move around if that's of interest too.
Well, and you can pick, as you assign people, but those are my top 2.
Sure. Selena?
I'm sorry, I keep muting myself. Housing, please.
John?
Transportation.
Sam?
Parks.
Brad and Cecilia will make sure, and also with Todd, that we'll follow up separately. So feel free to reach out to Tony and the team if there are any questions up there or want to talk through.
I'm already assigned for parks because I was on parks before, and it kind of made sense to kind of continue the work that, you know, I kind of helped to build to begin with. I also have an interest in transportation too. But parks, it just made sense since I had kind of started in that to continue on.
Perfect.
Okay, and then basically this was the next step. So as I mentioned, we'll have a steering and subcommittee meeting. That's January 28th. So Carrie has all these meetings already on your calendar. I mean, our goal again is to try to get these done with 4 meetings. I know it's kind of a lot to tackle, but the thought is also too that, you know, some of these questions that came up could be for further action items. And then we want to have public comment in April, some town hall meetings. Again, depending on how COVID works, we'll have to see is that a virtual open house session versus in-house. And then the goal is to have it adopted in June, and that would be the 5-year timeline of when we adopted the plan in 2016. So that is the end, and thank you all for coming. If you have any final comments or feedback, last chance.
Jocelyn.
Thank you, everybody. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Good job, everyone. Thank you. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, Cecilia.
Same thing. Thanks for all the work with this. I'm looking forward to working with everybody to see what we come up with. Thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate your time tonight. This is going to be a great project. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.